Welcome to Hot Topics. We're going to discuss in this video the small appliance circuits and how many you need and what receptacle outlets would the small appliance circuit supply. Now remember, if you've reviewed the video, uh, we told you how to calculate the number of circuits needed for the small appliance circuit in figure 10-5A in Stallcup's Electrical Design Book, Volume 1. We said basically you would take 120 volts to ground times a 20 amp circuit breaker divided by the 3 VA per square foot from 220.14J. We come up with 800 square foot. So you need 2, so 2 times 800 would be 1600. Now, as long as your kitchen that you see in the illustration, pantry, breakfast room, and dining room, if those areas do not exceed 1600 square foot, then you only really need 2 by code. Now, the ordinance of a state, county, or city may require more, or the homeowner may want more, or the developer, the builder of the home may want more. But if not, 2 is all you need. And then notice we kind of give you an NEC loop to go by in our figure. And notice GFCI protection 210.8A6. Outlet for refrigerators 210.8A6. Spacing for receptacles 210.52A1. Where they're to be installed 210.52B. For countertop receptacles 210.52C. And then again for the number required 210.11C1. And then the minimum required load 210.52A, which is 1500 VA. So we kind of pick up the kitchen, pantry, dining room, and breakfast room. Now in the illustration it's laid out, you have the kitchen, you have the pantry, then you go to the breakfast room, and then you go to the dining room. And sometimes the den may be included by electrical ordinances. You would need to check that out. But basically what this figure 10-11 is illustrating is receptacle outlets for the small appliance circuits in accordance with NEC 210.52B. Now, in the next video, we will outline where these receptacles would go, how you space them, and so forth. But now I will paraphrase the rules and requirements because we have about 7 illustrations we have to look at, and I don't want it to, the video to be so long that you get bored. So if you want to check out these sections that I give you for a better case study, you can, but I will paraphrase and give you the meat of the section and what's just required. And that's what this figure 10-11 is illustrating to the user of the NEC. Now let's look at this figure 10-12 that deals with receptacle outlets for small appliance circuits in accordance with 210.52B1, exceptions 1 and 2. But let's just review where these receptacles would be placed, and let's kind of start in this kitchen area. Then we know we need receptacles located in the kitchen area, and maybe for just a wall behind the countertop, or you may have a peninsula, you may have an island, and we'll kind of look at those receptacles, what's required and what's not. But now notice you could go into the breakfast room and have a receptacle that is switched by an outlet by the exception 1 to 210.52B1, and that would be counted as a required outlet if it's spaced and installed properly. We could also have for the refrigerator here in the exception 2 a direct circuit, 15 amps or greater, or we could connect it to the small appliance circuit, We'd have the privilege of doing that if we wanted to. And then, of course, we'd have a receptacle outside that could be connected to the small plant circuit. Also, from the garage, we have an exception for that. And I believe that's over in 210.11c where we would pick that up. I think that's correct. And then notice the wall space again. You would start 6 foot and every 12 foot, just like we've been doing. Of course, a fireplace, you wouldn't have a receptacle located there. You wouldn't have to do that, but right on the next side of it, within 6 foot of the fireplace, you would need a receptacle, then every 12 foot. And so the basic rule is the same. Anywhere, say the breakfast room, let's look at that in the illustration. In the center of those two receptacles, you see at the top there, then each way 6 foot, within 6 foot, you need a receptacle. And that's just a good way an electrician can look at that. And a lot of times you'll install those receptacles by just taking the same hammer length and just put it up against the wall and set your receptacle. Or you put a line across there and set them, at 12-inch centers. However you want to do it, you're just consistent with it so that they're evenly spaced horizontally there, evenly, and look good, like a good installation should. And then notice the receptacle outlet over here that you see at the bottom. The exception one there says if it's over 5 foot 6 inches from the floor, then it's not a required outlet. You'd have to put another outlet in if it was necessary, if you didn't have 6 foot between the other two outlets, say, in the center. So that's a good way to look at that. And then you notice the same thing that we talked about. If you have a switched outlet, that can count as one of the required receptacles if you locate it properly by the code. And again, you go around the wall with that 6 foot measurement that we talked about from the door, then every 12 foot. And again, you need to have a receptacle within 6 foot in either direction in the center. And that's a very good rule of thumb to use if you're setting boxes, when you're at the framing stage and you just have the stud there. That's a good way for you to do that. And then, of course, we'll get into the kitchen countertops, the island, the peninsula as we go through this. But what this is showing, we need 2 small appliance circuits to supply the area that you see here, not counting the patio out there naturally, but the kitchen, pantry, dining room, and breakfast room. And then again, not being too repetitious here, but to determine when you've exceeded your square footage and you need 3, just take a 20 amp circuit breaker times 120 volts to ground, divide it by the 3 VA per square foot that we find in 220.14J, and you come up with 800 square foot. So you have to have 2 small appliance circuits for this area: kitchen, pantry, dining room, and breakfast room. So if you multiply 800 by 2, that's 1,600 square foot. And you say the area that you look at in this illustration, figure 10-12, if you exceed that 1,600 square foot, you need to bring in another circuit by the code. But you may have to have more circuits than just 2 by city ordinance or state or county type ordinance, or the builder wants more because the person that's having the home built maybe wants more small appliance circuits. So this is typically how we deal with the small appliance circuits, and that's what this figure 10-12 is illustrating to the user of the NEC. Now let's look at this figure 10-13 from Stallcup's Designing Electrical System book, volume 1. And we're dealing with wall counter spaces now. In other words, behind the countertop, as you see in the illustration, we have a wall. That's not a peninsula or an island, so we wouldn't have to have the new rule here. I just kind of threw that in to warn you about it. We'll see that in the next video. But notice what you do, you could start at the sink, and you'd move over 2 foot, then you would move over 4 foot. And again, see, your good rule of thumb is right in the center there, see. You should be within 2 foot each way of a receptacle. And that would help you when you have framing members, and the framing member just don't fall perfectly for you to have a receptacle located at 4 foot. This shows how you would do it, or if you want it exact, you may have to even add in another framing member. See, so it depends on the amount of time. If you're setting the boxes as an apprentice, helper, electrician, whatever your classification may be. But notice now, no face up. You can't have a face-up receptacle in the counter by the informational note 1 to 210.52C1. Now, starting to the left of the sink is always a good place to start. 2 foot, again, every 4 foot. And then, of course, you don't need a receptacle behind the cooktop here. But now, next to the cooktop, if you're 2 foot or more, you need another receptacle there, see. So it's a 2 foot rule all the way when you measure to see if you need another receptacle, or if you space properly. And again, looking at the illustration from the sink, 2 foot over 4 foot, just go to the center, and 2 foot in each direction, you need a receptacle, and that would kind of give you the a guideline to go by. And then notice you could put a receptacle in the side of the countertop, and notice that that would be where you just couldn't get it on the wall. If you can put it on the wall, you have a restriction from the bottom of the cabinet up. It'd be a 20-inch roof for the countertop, and that'd be the exception. And then when you apply the exception, you would need to make sure you're with the authority having jurisdiction approval of that with 90.4. This is 210.52C5 exception if you wanted to review this 20-inch rule. And then notice, set an additional receptacle if 12 inches or more per 210.52C1, then you'd be within that 2 foot in any direction if you wanted to plug in a toaster, a mixer, a blender, or something like that. So we'll get into these multi-outlet assemblies, but notice one thing they wanted to point out here, that a multi-out assembly is considered one outlet. So you'd say, well, my goodness, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there. Well, that's just one outlet. That's how you would have to consider that, see. And then we'll get into the new rule for the number of receptacles. And basically, we'd apply these 2 rules right here. We warn you about it in this illustration. If you have an island or a peninsula. And then, of course, you're going to space by 210.52C and C1. And then the GFCI protection is 210.8A6. Now, when we deal with dwelling units, 210.8A is always dwelling units. 210.8B is these receptacles required to be GFCI protected in commercial and industrial type locations other than dwelling units. And so that's what this, our figure here, figure 10-13, is illustrating. Wall countertop spaces in accordance with NEC 210.52C and C1, and that's what this figure is illustrating to the user of the NEC. Now let's look at this figure 10-14, and let's review island and peninsula countertops in accordance with NEC 210.52C1 and C3. Now, I am going to take time to read this particular section with you so that we get a good feel for what's required in this new 2020 edition of the NEC. Now, let's go over to page 68 of your code book, and on the right-hand side of the page, down toward the bottom, we pick up 210.52C as in car, countertops, and workspaces. And then basically, this is the rule. In kitchens, pantries, breakfast rooms, dining rooms, and similar areas of a dwelling unit, receptacle outlets for countertops and work surfaces, that are 12 inches or wider, so that's one of the rules there, 12 inches or wider, shall be installed in accordance with 210.52C1 through C3, and shall not be considered as the receptacle outlets required by 210.52A, for where you had a wall, for example. And then this is very important, I think, next, for the purpose of this section. We're using multi-outlet assemblies, 12 inches of multi-outlet assembly, with one or more receptacles shall be considered one outlet. In other words, you couldn't just put a multi-outlet assembly there and say, okay, we have the 3 or 4 outlets required by this section when you do the math, as we'll see coming up. And then, of course, then we would look at C1, which is on page 69, left-hand side of the page at the top, and it talks about receptacle outlets shall be installed so that no point along the wall line is more than 24 inches measured horizontally down the receptacle area, and a receptacle should be installed within that space. And then the exception says receptacle outlets shall not be required directly below a range, countertop, cooking, any type of cooking equipment like that. And of course, we have a figure, 210.52C1 in the code that would illustrate that. And then the next section you get, which is new, and that's C2, and we're going to look at that, where you have to take the dimensions of the countertop, and then you may have to have more than just one receptacle wherever you want to put it, like in the 2017 edition of the NEC. Now, with that thought in mind, we want to look what is considered an acceptable receptacle install. Now, notice you can't have a tombstone, as you see down to the right hand side of that illustration. Tombstones are not allowed anymore. Now, you'd have to have a push type that you could push it and pop up, use it, and then recess it back if that's what you want to do. You could also, if it was 12 inches or less with the overhang, or 6 inches, with the overhang, you could drop down no further than 12 inches and put it in the side of the, say, the island. If you had space to do it, and there wasn't drawer space there or anything like that, just wall space, or counter space, you'd have to look at that. Now, that's in accordance with 210.52C2 and C3 if you wanted to read up on it, see. But now, you see the center line, we're over 12 inches wide here. We're 24 inches wide. So right in the center is where you would make your measurement, see. And we would need at least one receptacle there per 2017 NEC. But now notice, looking at the island you see up here, you need a receptacle within 24 inches from the end of that island, see. And then you're measuring from the wall again, not where it's attached. So you'd measure out that 4 foot to the wall, you'd need to put that receptacle. And then you would need one within 24 inches as you read in the 210.52C2 and C3 there that you would review. Now, the new rule you see is right to the left, right almost the center of the illustration. And you had an 8x4 area. Now, that'd be 32 inches. First 9 feet, one receptacle. The next 18 feet, see, it's double there, you need one. And then if you, the next 5 feet, you'd need one. So that'd be 3, see, that you would need to install there. So that's quite different. Now you got, some of the electricians, are saying, hey, we're having trouble getting those in that area where you have drawers areas like that open up, and you store stuff. It's becoming a real problem there. So we need to get with the builder if you're the electrician and say, hey, how's this island peninsula going to be constructed? And because I got to have room to get the number of receptacles based upon the dimensions of the island. So that's what this figure is illustrating, is the island and peninsula countertop spaces are required to have receptacles now based upon the dimension the dimensions of the island. See, so that's what this NEC 21052 C2 and C3 is illustrating to the user of the NEC. And then when you deal with that tombstone receptacle or pop-up allowed, just look at 406.5 E, F, G, and H. You're going to have E, F, G, and H. Read those very carefully. And when you compare 210.52 C2 and C3 with 406.5 E, F, G, and H, you'll have a good handle on where and how these outlets have to be installed. And that's what this illustration is illustrating to the user of the NEC. Now let's take a look at this figure 10 15. Yeah, figure 10-15. And it's bathroom receptacles in accordance with 210.52D as in dog. Now, notice you could go over, I think it's page 264, and look at 404.4C, and you're not allowed to have a switch in a shower or bathroom area. 406.9C now, I believe that you would pick that up around page 270, somewhere in there. And it says you can't put a receptacle there either. And then, of course, I suggest very highly, and I think I have it written down here for you, look at 506.5E as in Ed, 506.5G is in gray, and that's on page 267 and 268 of the NEC, and then you get more information about these receptacles. Now, lighting outlets, you can look at figure 11-7. We also, we suggest you look at 210.11C3. Has a lot of information about the small appliance circuit. 210.8A1 is your GFCI protection rule for it. And then notice the receptacle has to be within 3 foot of the sink here, see. You could put it on the wall if you have space. But if you don't want to cut into a mirror and maybe, damage the mirror in some way, then you could drop down 12 inches anywhere on the sink area here and put the receptacle also. But that's basically what it is. And if you had a dual sink, you'll see sometimes right in the center of the sinks, 3 foot each way, you could have one receptacle or put one for each sink, and we find that in 210.52D is in dog. And we bring that 20 amp circuit into the bathroom area, and that's what this figure 10-15 is illustrating: receptacle outlets in bathrooms installed in accordance with 210.52D and inside a shower or inside the bathroom. 404.4C is in car for the switch, and 406.9C is in car for the receptacle. For the GFCI protection, 210.8A1, and then of course you'd learn more about small appliance circuit rules in 210.11C3, and then make sure you review your 210.52D. And that's basically what this figure 10-15 is illustrating to the user of the NEC. Now let's look at this figure 10-16. Basically, it deals with receptacle outlets outdoors in accordance with 210.52E. Now let's start at the top of the illustration, left-hand side. And over 6 foot 6 inches, if the receptacle is installed there, it shall not be considered to have grade level access. Like Christmas light decoration plug into that outlet. But it's not considered a required outlet of 210.52E. Now, receptacle outlets on the open porch, 6 foot 6 inches or less from grade, is considered a required outlet. You could have an outlet on a post out here, but it had to be GFCI protected. You see, you have a receptacle right here by the garage. Now we know that 210.11C4 on page 64 of the code requires a 20 amp circuit brought to the garage. And if you have a double bay area, you need a receptacle on each side of that bay, see. But the exception 1 to 210.11C4 will allow the GFCI protected receptacle in the garage to protect this receptacle outside that you see there under the exception number 1. So you're basically looking at 210.52G on page 70, I think it is, for the garage receptacle. And then you're reviewing 210.11C4 and exception 1 for the 20 amp circuit brought to the garage, and then the exception 1 allowing you to supply that outside receptacle by the garage door there that you see. Now, again, at the top of the illustration, over 6 foot 6 shall not be considered to have grade level access. But on that balcony there, see, the balcony, if it's not accessible from inside the dwelling unit, or is the receptacle outlet required in back of the dwelling unit? So we know yes, but if it's not accessible up here, you really don't need a receptacle there, is basically what the code is saying. And then if you, for the, say, a lighting outlet in the garage, you would go over and look at your figure 11-5 for lighting outlets there. So basically then, this is what we're saying. If you want to put a receptacle up there, you can, but it's by the balcony. But it's really not considered a receptacle that would be considered the 6 foot 6 rule. You'd have to be below that. So you see that wouldn't be considered, and that's a window. You don't really have access to that balcony area. So basically speaking, that's what this figure 10-16 is illustrating to the user of the NEC when they are dealing with receptacle outlets installed outdoors in accordance with 210.52E of the NEC. Before we get into this figure 10-17, dealing with a laundry circuit in accordance with NEC 210.52F, I would like to remind you, if you don't mind, if these videos are helping you, and again, if they are helping you, I would like to invite you to hit the subscribe button and be a subscriber to our channel. It would sure help us be able to keep these videos coming to you. But again, if you feel like they're helping you, I would like to remind you of that. Now, getting into this laundry circuit, first of all, if you have a lighting outlet, 210.70A that you see in the illustration, we can go over to figure 11-17 and get into the installation requirements of luminaires. And notice 404.8A is a section that electricians and inspectors use, that 6 foot 7 inches to the center of the handle of that switch and below is considered an acceptable switch outlet. See, above that, no, you'd be too high. So usually we measure about 56-inch centers to set that switch. However you want to do it, just as long as you stay within this 6 foot 7 inch limitation here. But notice that these outlets are not permitted to be connected to this 20 amp small appliance circuit that is brought to the laundry area. But notice a built-in ironing board, yes, that built-in ironing board could be in accordance with 210.50C. The washing machine now needs this small appliance circuit in accordance with 210.52F. And then notice a receptacle outlet must be GFCI protected in accordance with 210.8A10 and the NEC. But notice you could also may have a gas dryer, for example, and have a 120 volt outlet there connecting the gas dryer, and that also could be supplied by this small appliance circuit because that's part of the area being served by the small appliance circuit, but not a lighting outlet or other outlets that are not used for laundry purposes. And basically that's what the NEC 210.52F is illustrating to the user of the NEC.